It is so lovely to be here with you all. I am project manager at Baptist Women in Ministry, as Helen Lovely introduced us all. Baptist Women in Ministry commissions and publishes the State of Women in Baptist Life report every 5 years to shed light on how many women are serving in various ministry capacities here in the U.S. In the 2021 report, which is the most recent report we just did, we also wanted to count not only how many women were serving, but also really get at the question of how are women doing in their ministry settings. So to do this, we conducted a survey, which 555 Baptist folk took here in the US to learn more about the obstacles that women continue to face in ministry and the current perceptions of congregational support of women in ministry. You should have a link in the chat that I think Meredith is going to place in there with the full results of the survey, excellent, as well as some statistics of how many women are serving. You can also scan the QR code on your screen. That'll get you to the report as well. So today, I'm just going to share some of the most important statistics that we found from the survey. So the first half of the survey, we asked women in ministry specifically about some of the barriers that they face to ministry. And we found that 86% of women experience obstacles to their ministry because of their gender. Often when we think about the obstacles that women face, we often think about what I call boulder-sized obstacles. These are the times that women are told that because of their gender, they can't get a job, they can't minister, or perhaps they can't even get into the room. Our survey found that 63% of women in ministry feel like they have to fight for a seat at the table, and 59% said that they are overlooked and silenced in their ministry settings. These bigger obstacles are often the result of smaller barriers that come in the form of comments and microaggressions and just daily struggles that really prevent women from being able to fully minister. For example, 59% said that their judgment was questioned in their area of expertise. And the most common obstacle that women in ministry encounter, according to the survey that we conducted, was that 72% have to provide more evidence of their competence than their male counterparts did. Women also reported that men get credit for their ideas, that peers and parishioners are patronizing to them, that men interrupt them or talk over them during meetings, that they're mistaken for someone at a lower professional level, or that they're addressed in unprofessional ways. All of these things really add up and create those boulder-sized barriers, and they prevent women from really being able to thrive in ministry and bring their gifts and their full self to the situations and the environments that they're in. At the end of the survey, respondents had the opportunity to leave some comments, and many of those quotes are scattered throughout the report. If you want to look at a few of those later, I just wanted to read a few of them here for you today. When I begin to mention making leadership decision-making equitable or make any statement in opposition, I'm immediately interrupted, shot down, or called disagreeable. I have felt called to preach, but I don't have support in my local fellowship. I know I am called, but I feel lost and unsupported and completely disregarded. While I still identify with my Baptist roots, I decided to move toward service in another denomination where I would be invited to serve as pastor and use the gifts I was given. I miss my connections with Baptist churches, but do not feel there's a place for me. These are three of many of the quotes that women shared with us to expand on some of their experiences and feelings of exclusion in the church. In the final survey question, we posed this question to women in ministry. Have you personally experienced sexual harassment, misconduct, or assault in your ministry setting? And 25% of women said yes. This means that 1 in 4 Baptist women in the US have been sexually assaulted or harassed while working and serving in their ministry setting, presumably by someone that they work with or encounter on a regular basis in their setting. This statistic is a harsh reminder that the experiences of women in ministry do not happen in a vacuum. Rather, they are the results of ethos of congregations and other ministry settings. The second half of the survey asks questions to respondents about their personal perceptions of support of women in ministry within their own churches. It's important to know about these perceptions because our survey found that 87% of women in ministry said that their congregation's support of them has direct impact on their ability to thrive. So both men and women in and out of ministry were able to answer the second part of this survey. Despite the obstacles that women face, the majority of respondents seem to think that their congregations were doing pretty well to support women in ministry. So we gave respondents 5 options to answer about the level at which they believed their church was supportive of women. If you look at the chart here, green is fully supportive, teal is relatively supportive, purple is less supportive, light blue is uncertain about level of support, and gray is not supportive at all. You can see that the majority of respondents thought that their church was doing relatively well or very well at supporting women in ministry. We really think that this shows a bit of a gap between how people believe they are doing to support women in ministry and the reality of the obstacles that women continue to face. In response, we offer 2 fundamental ideas of how churches can close the gap between perception and reality. The first one is to have women serving in all areas of the church. The bars here represent how often women are already serving in various capacities, from greeters to Bible teachers to ministers and preachers and pastors. Dark purple is very frequently, light purple frequently, green sometimes, teal rarely, light blue never. You can see that women are serving more often in lower levels of leadership and less often in higher levels of leadership. However, overall, you can see on the chart that women are serving in a lot of different capacities, at least some of the time, in a lot of churches, which is a good thing. The second recommendation that we make for churches to help them become a place where women can better thrive in ministry is to have a kind of theology that uplifts women and girls. So we use the same colors here on this chart, and you can see that there's a lot less light and dark purple, which were the frequently and very frequently of how often this is happening in a church. So we ask things like, how often are you using the Bible in your church to support the equality of women? How often are you using gender inclusive language? How often are you discussing the empowerment of women and girls? Most notably, I want to draw your attention to the last bar there. Even though 1 in 4 women have been sexually harassed or assaulted in their ministry setting, 51% of respondents told us that sexual harassment and assault are discussed never or rarely in congregations. So this chart and the one before it really shows how often measures are being taken to cultivate an environment where women can thrive in ministry. But there are also clear suggestions for the ways that churches can help move the needle toward equity for women in leadership roles and in the church. Overall, our survey results convey a deep need for further work to the full affirmation and celebration of women's gifts in ministry. However, we really believe that this goal is not unattainable in the US and, of course, in your settings as well. And we really think that churches have the power and they have the ability to foster communities where women can thrive by taking steps like those we suggested here in this chart and the previous one. I'm now going to turn it over to Executive Director Meredith Stone, who is going to talk us through some more next steps.
Thanks, Laura. And thank you so much to Helen and Jane for the invitation for Laura and I to share with you. We are your sisters in this work. Our organization's goal is to support and equip women who are serving in and pursuing ministry, as well as to advocate for their full affirmation in Baptist life. And so this report, the State of Women in Baptist Life, is something that was commissioned by our organization in 2003. that we produce around every 5 years. The report has two basic parts, and what Laura just shared with you was about the first part of this overall report that we share. Each report has a different first part, and it's in the second part that we are keeping some statistics consistently over the years so that we can measure if progress is really happening for women in ministry. The second half of the report keeps statistics on women's ordinations, women serving as pastors and co-pastors, the number of women who are preparing for ministry as seminary students, and all of this within various Baptist organizations who affirm women's ordination, so that we can really measure how that progress is taking place. In the U.S., Baptists are very dogmatic about their autonomy. And so even just the practice of keeping these statistics is a difficult one, because none of them are reported to a central agency. Ordinations don't have to be recognized by a denominational body. It's all within the control of the local church. And so that's one piece that we're trying to do, is to centralize some information so that we can really be able to tell the story of how we're doing. Are we making any progress? And hopefully to serve as kind of a motivator for progress by keeping these statistics. But as Laura and I started to dream how we might present this report, this most current one, and we thought about what that first half of the report would look like, we really wanted to dig in a little bit deeper, because we can report statistics, we can give numbers to people, but numbers don't always tell the whole story. We can tell you the number of women serving as senior pastors and co-pastors in different denominational groups, but what about the women who are serving as associate pastors, staff ministers, chaplains, missionaries, professors, and in nonprofit settings? A woman might be called to serve in a particular ministry setting, which in itself is at least a marker that that place has some level of support for women in ministry. But we really had this suspicion that what we encounter when we get there is not always the same as the support that is being voiced. And so by having this survey and wanting to hear from women who are serving across the U.S. in Baptist settings, and then to think about the congregational support of women in ministry, that was our way of trying to dig a little bit deeper, and to ask the question, is the culture of Baptist life truly changing in order to match the theology that is being said, in order to match the ways in which some of our Baptist groups have been removing, at least in their theological minds, barriers against women serving in ministry? Is the culture lining up with what we are saying? Are Baptists practicing what we preach? And so with this information, as we are looking at our work and what it does for us, how it helps us move forward, there are a couple of things that we use this information to do. The first is to better tell the story. Some of my work in advocacy has a lot of different parts. Some of it winds up being in meetings with denominational groups and organizations. I meet with search committees who are including women in their senior pastor searches and try to help them think about how to include women in an equitable manner. I meet with women and try to train other denominational leaders so that they understand what women in ministry are truly facing. And I can't tell you how many times I have heard someone say to me, listen, we figured out that women in ministry business, 20 years ago. We've been ordaining women for 20 years. We've got this all figured out. We don't need Baptist women in ministry anymore. To which now I have statistics that I can say, okay, if you figured it out 20 years ago, then why are 86% of women in ministry still experiencing these kinds of obstacles simply because they are women? Why do 72% of women in ministry among Baptists still have to provide more evidence of their competence? Why do 25% say that they have experienced sexual harassment and assault in their ministry setting? And hopefully this information helps us to at least make the case to our denominational leaders who think that they have moved far down the road on women in ministry, that we still have a lot of work to do. The second thing that we are hoping that this research will do for us is in some new work that we are imagining in building our equipping work for congregations. We want to inform a bigger picture for congregations to think about how each individual congregation might create a culture which is more empowering of every woman within their congregational membership. And we think we've chosen congregations to highlight this type of work because we believe that congregations are the nexus of faith life for Baptists. Even if a woman is serving in ministry outside of the local church as a chaplain, as a missionary, then her call has probably been informed by her local church. She probably still has a local church which is providing her some sort of community that is either supporting or hindering her efforts to find her value and wholeness as a minister. And so we think congregations, finding a way to help congregations think about transforming who they are and what they do in every aspect of congregational life could be a way in which we could see a real difference for women in ministry. So we've been working on this project, and in addition to this work, as I have conversations across with different faith leaders, conducting kind of informal qualitative research to think about what are the markers that we would find in a congregation that truly is empowering of women. What would the markers be of this place where a woman in ministry would come in and would be able to thrive without barriers? And so as I've begun cultivating this list, what we imagine is that we could create a kind of assessment tool for a congregation, that they would be able to see these markers or these goalposts of what it would look like to be a woman empowering congregation, and then to measure where they are at. And so the kind of markers that we have put together range from, the church's bylaws and constitution. How do those indicate support for women in ministry? Personnel policies in various areas, from equal pay and equal titles to more, such as clearly defined processes for ordination, clearly defined leave policies, and much more. Conducting sexual harassment training for all congregational leaders. How often is this taking place? As Laura mentioned, some of these theological ideas, using inclusive language for people and expansive language for God as a way of reinforcing our belief of the equality of all persons. Measuring the percentage of lay women serving on various committees, but also how lay women are treated as they lead in those committees. What is their experience as they are trying to gather a group of people within their congregation and move them toward a particular cause? The percentage of women who engage in public leadership, public worship leadership, from preaching to leading congregational singing, reading in scripture, ushers, serving communion, and more. The content of the materials that are used in spiritual formation classes. Are those materials emphasizing anecdotes and stories about men, written by men and for men, or are they elevating women's experience? Are they elevating women within the Bible, anecdotes that apply to women's life? And then all the way down in this assessment to figuring out the way the church's dollars are being used. What percentage of the church's mission dollars are going toward missions that are specifically empowering of women? What percentage of the church, if they have a foundation, what percentage of those foundation dollars are going to empower women? What percentage of the church's vendors are women? So as we kind of create all of these markers, and I kind of just gave a quick sampling of some of the things that we are looking at that are informed by this research, but then also conversations that we are having throughout Baptist life within the U.S. As we put together this assessment, we imagine that congregations might be able to take a look at what this is and find their score. And then we might be able to walk alongside of them and to put some practices in place that might be transforming for them. There's a statistic within corporate life, within some of the research that's been done on women in the workplace that say, if you can get over 30% and the highest levels of leadership to have women, on the board or in the cabinet or whatever that looks like, then 30% serves as this kind of tipping point, that then things just start to fall in line. So if we're able to do this assessment and even get congregations to take one step or two steps, maybe that might get them closer toward that tipping point where everything else might continue to fall and the dominoes would, so that they become a woman empowering congregation. Now, some folks might say to us as we are aiming our work and thinking about how do we advocate within congregations and say, wouldn't a better way to approach this be to just work with the women, to tell them about the barriers that they're going to face, equip them for all that they are going to be encountering, and give them skills and tools to navigate these kinds of barriers that Laura talked about? And to that we say, yes, absolutely. And that is part of the work that we do at Baptist Women in Ministry in supporting and equipping women ministers to face this Baptist world that has been defined largely by men. But in addition to that, why should we put the onus of changing oppression on those who have been oppressed? Instead of just telling the women that it's their job to change in order to meet what the system is like, we also want to change the system. We want to create opportunities to eliminate the barriers and the limitations that women have been facing, and to try and swing the pendulum to more equitable practices for our Baptist congregations. Whenever we're dealing with this patriarchy and sexism, the oppression that has been embedded within the Christian church for 2,000 years, then equal is not going to be enough to overcome the disadvantages that women have faced within faith life. Instead, we need to swing the pendulum toward equity. We need to see a congregation that is not only treating women as equal, but is empowering women and elevating them, so that every woman within our congregations, whether she is called to vocational ministry or whether she's living out God's call in her life in another place, might be able to do that knowing her full value within the beloved community of God. So once again, we're so grateful for this opportunity to get to share with you, but even more than that, we're grateful to know that we have such great partners and sisters in this work that we know is faced across the church, across our globe. So thanks again for letting us be here with you and share with you.